Order. Welcome to meeting number 18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motion adopted by this committee on Wednesday, October 28, 2020, the committee will resume its study of the review of the Employment Insurance Program. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. We have with us today from the Canada Revenue Agency, Annette Beauty-Coffer, the Assistant Commissioner and Chief Information Officer, Frank Vermaeten, Assistant Commissioner, and from Statistics Canada, Josie Bégin, Director General, Labour Market Education and Socioeconomic Wellbeing, and Vincent Dale, Director, Centre for Labour Market Information. For the benefit of our witnesses, just a few additional comments. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. We'll start with Mr. Vermaeten for 5 minutes, please. You have the floor, sir. Welcome to the committee.
Welcome. Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee today as you continue your review of the Employment Insurance Program. With me is my colleague Annette Beauty-Coffer, who's our Assistant Commissioner and Chief Information Officer of the Information Technology Branch at the Canada Revenue Agency. In my brief remarks, I'd like to provide the committee with a short description of the CRA's responsibility with regard to delivering benefits to Canadians. First and foremost, the CRA seeks to ensure that Canadians obtain benefit payments in a timely manner and have avenues of redress when they disagree with a decision on their benefit eligibility. The CRA administers the Canada Child Benefit, the Goods and Services Tax, the Harmonized Sales Tax Credit, Children's Special Allowances, the Disability Tax Credit, the Canada Workers Benefit, and provincial and territorial programs. Indeed, the CRA uses its federal tax delivery infrastructure to administer 181 services and ongoing benefits and one-time payment programs on behalf of the provinces and territories. These income-tested benefits and other services contribute directly to the economic and social well-being of Canadians by supporting families and children. I should note that while the CRA is the administrator of many other benefits, the CRA has no direct involvement in the administration of the EI program or EI system. As the committee may note, the CRA's role in delivering benefits evolved as the COVID-19 pandemic hit at the peak of the 2019 tax season. The CRA shifted gears to focus on the administration and issuance of emergency benefits to Canadians impacted by the pandemic. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit was launched in April 2020 and was jointly administered by the CRA and Service Canada. Given the speed required to deliver the CERB payments to Canadians within some 3 weeks and the initial 16-week duration, the CRA leveraged pre-existing information technology services to ensure payments would be issued on a timely basis. As of February 14th, 2021, the CRA processed 22,652,229 CERB applications, representing $45.3 billion paid to Canadians. The CERB was followed by the Canada Emergency Student Benefits, or CESB, in 2020, which leveraged the program and system design of CERB. Through the course of administering the CESB, the CRA has processed 2,140,226 applications representing $2.94 billion paid to Canadians. As part of the transition from CERB in the fall of 2020, the CRA now administers 3 new COVID benefits: the Canada Recovery Benefit, the Canada Recovery Caregiver Benefit, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit. As of February 13th, 2021, the CRA has processed and paid out to Canadians for the CRB, the Recovery Benefit, 9,864,423 applications representing $9.86 billion. For the CRCB, that's the Caregiver, 2,840,045 applications representing $1.42 billion. and for the CRSB, 675,473 applications, representing 337 million, and 0.74 million. In addition, the CRA also administers the emergency wage subsidy and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy programs that were launched to assist businesses during the pandemic. As of February 14th, 2021, 2,619,890 wage subsidy applications were approved with a $65.56 billion value of the subsidies approved. As of February 7th, 2021, 347,480 rent subsidy applications were approved with 1.29 billion in payments of the subsidies approved. In conclusion, while the CRA has no direct involvement in the administration of the EI program or systems, as those are the responsibility of ESDC, the CRA plays an important role in delivering many other benefits on which Canadians rely. So thank you again for the invitation to appear, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Budakoffer and I would be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Statistics Canada. Is it Ms. Bégin or Mr.
Yes,
Dado?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bégin, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for inviting Statistics Canada today to speak as part of the study on employment insurance. Statistics Canada dispose de plusieurs sources de
Statistics Canada has many data sources, such as the Labour Force Survey and employment insurance statistics, that are used to paint a more complete portrait of labour market-related events. Many of the indicators I will cite today are drawn from these resources. Each data source has its benefits and drawbacks, for example, in terms of coverage, sample size, and how quickly data are published. The pandemic has caused unprecedented job losses in Canada. Total employment fell by more than 3 million during the worst of the crisis in March and April. Within 3 months, the unemployment rate almost tripled, reaching 13.7% in May. Although the labour market has improved since then, most labour market indicators have not yet returned to pre-pandemic levels. Their recovery has been slowed by the public health measures in place. In January 2021, the unemployment rate stood at 9.4% compared with 5.7% in February 2020. The number of long-term unemployed workers, i.e. people who have been looking for work or on temporary layoff for 27 weeks or more, remained at a record high, 512,000. New experimental data show that COVID-19 has significantly impacted groups designated as visible minorities. In January, the unemployment rate of Black Canadians was 5.3 percentage points higher than a year earlier, versus an increase of 3.7 percentage points for Canadians who did not identify as Indigenous or did not belong to a group designated as a visible minority. This more precarious labour market situation for population groups designated as visible minorities is partly due to the higher concentration of these workers in some of the sectors most affected by the COVID-19 economic crisis, such as accommodation and food services. Looking at age groups, youth employment in January 2021 was the furthest, minus 14%, from the pre-pandemic levels of February 2020 when compared with other demographic groups, particularly employment among young women, minus 17%. Last December, 1.3 million Canadians were receiving regular EI benefits, almost triple the number from February 2020, which was at 446,000. The results of the Labour Force Survey, LFS, show that 1.8 million people were unemployed in December, including 1.5 million who were looking for work and 300,000 who had a connection to a job, either because they had been laid off temporarily or because they had arrangements to start a new job in the near future. There is always a proportion of unemployed who are not eligible for EI benefits. Some unemployed people have not contributed to the program because they have not worked in the past 12 months or because their job was not insured. Others contributed to the program, but they do not meet the eligibility criteria. In December, 13% of all regular EI beneficiaries were eligible as a result of temporary changes made to the eligibility rules in September 2020. This proportion was higher in Quebec, 16%, and in the Atlantic provinces than in other provinces. The December LFS results revealed that the industries where employment remained furthest from pre-COVID levels included accommodation and food services, information, culture and recreation, and other services, including personal services and laundry services. The challenges facing these industries are reflected in the profile of regular EI beneficiaries. For example, in December, more than 1 in 4 regular EI beneficiaries had last worked in one of these 3 sectors. The uneven impact of COVID-19 across industries, combined with relaxation of the rules for accessing the EI program, has also driven the proportion of women who receive regular benefits upward, which rose from 37% in February to 48% in December.
Chair, I hope that this overview of the Canadian labour market will be useful to the committee, and my colleague Vincent and I would be happy then to answer any of your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bégin. We'll now start with Mr. Lawrence from the Conservatives. 6 minutes.
Committee, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. My questions will all be with respect to the CRA. So I'm very much looking forward to Statistics Canada too, but I'll just direct my questions to the CRA for my portion. The first thing I want to start out with is the rent subsidy. Initially, that was administered by the mortgage by the CMHC, and I think to nearly everyone's appraisal is that it failed there, and then was eventually transferred over to the CRA. I'm wondering if they could comment as to why the CRA was not initially given that portfolio, as it seems as though they're doing a much better job than the CMHC did.
Frank Vermonten here. So I really can't comment on that. It was we weren't involved in that decision in terms of who would undertake what program. We were approached to do the wage subsidy, and that was a large undertaking with respect to delivering something for businesses. So I'm speculating here entirely, but it's quite possible that had they approached us on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I will cut you off. I apologize. I'm not a rude person. I just want to get everything in I can.
Not a problem.
Did anything change materially from, I believe it was about November, you started administering the rent subsidy between then and March, other than perhaps, as you mentioned, your workflow from the other pandemic relief benefits?
Not that I can think of in the context of the question you're asking.
So then it would be fair to assume that that you would have been quite capable of administering that program.
I think, as I said, it would have been a challenge to launch both the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy at the same time. It was a huge undertaking to do the wage subsidy, and in fact, then the rent subsidy was very much based on the architecture of the wage subsidy, and so it was replicating something rather than starting from scratch.
Okay, and but fair to say that it might have been challenging, but it might have been possible. And given the colossal failure that the rent subsidy was in the CMHC, perhaps in retrospect that would have been a better decision.
I can't speculate on that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You've said everything I need there, so thank you. And would just like to jump now to the administering of the CERB claims. And could you give us an idea on the CERB or the CRB what the rate of decline is? How many applications are declined for substantive or technical? If you have that degree of information.
Yeah. Sorry, just to get clarification on the question, you'd like to know how the volumes have declined over time?
No, sorry, no, the rate of decline. So if I apply and my application is not accepted.
Oh, so how many people would apply? Well, difficult to say. It changes, but certainly when we launched the CERB, we declined a very small number of the applications because when the program was up and running, there weren't as many upfront validations, and we didn't have 2019 income at that time. So now you move to the CERB, to the CRB and the new measures. We put in place more upfront validation. We're able to look at 2019 income. We're able to look at a broader range of things. So so I don't have a precise number, but my guess would be a little bit under 5%, but certainly I could get that for you.
Perfect. I was just going to ask that. Thank you. If you could get that to the committee, that would be great. Just with respect to one of the reasons why I believe CRBs are declined, an issue we got from a lot of our Canadians from coast to coast to coast, where people were applying for EI, they were not eligible, then and they were attempting to apply for CRB, but they were declined due to a technical error because the two softwares between the EI system and the CRA system would not work. Has that been resolved now?
I would say that is a rare occurrence relative to the total number of people applying. So generally speaking, as you said, if you do, if you've applied for EI and you're still EI eligible, the legislation in fact says you're not eligible for the CRB. You need to first go to EI. So in the vast majority of cases, the system works exactly how it should. There's rare situations, for example, when somebody is...
with respect, and like I said, I don't mean to be rude, but limited time. I have had literally hundreds of people, and that might not seem a huge amount, but I can tell you, to the family that I delivered food to, that was a big deal. And my question is that issue resolved?
We have set up a new system where when individuals in those rare situations run into that problem, that it can be resolved. So is it 100% resolved? No, people will need to call when they're in that rare situation. And like you said, it's hundreds.
Sorry, I just really want to grab this next question there, my friend.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I understand that once you've been denied, and some of them are legitimate, and I've talked to some folks who have been denied, that we're actually putting people through the notice of objection system, which is for your taxes, which can take up to 6 months of a year. These are people who are struck down by the pandemic, having horrible times, perhaps the worst times in their lives, and now they may have a rightful claim, but they won't get their day in court for literally 6 months, if not years. Is that true?
I'd say I'd have to look into that. Generally, that is not the procedure. If individuals are blocked for whatever reason, for example, we don't have any income on their files, or we have income and it suggests it's too low, or they're not or they don't meet the age, they are entitled to call us. And if they can put forth a reasonable case, we do that right over the phone, and there's no need to go to an objection.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. And thank you, Mr. Vermont.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that the witness didn't have enough time to answer the question to give the committee a full lens on his explanation. Would it be possible for the witness to submit a written response to some of the questions that he felt that he didn't have enough time to respond?
It's always possible for a witness to augment or clarify their answers in writing after the fact, so that won't be a problem. Generally, Mr. Dong, the length of the answer is to match the length of the question, and you're right that Mr. Lawrence did interrupt the witness a couple of times, but he did allow him as much time as he took to answer the question, so it wasn't. I didn't see him as being entirely unfair. But to the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. And with that, Mr. Dong, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank all the witnesses for taking time to the committee to answer some of these very important questions. I'm going to stick with StatsCan because it's very, very interesting to me. As we all know that Member of Parliament sometimes reference to StatsCan's finding in our debates in question period. I just want to ask, and especially in comparison to the numbers between Canada and United States for all good reasons, because our economy is very similar and very much linked as well. Would you be able to let us know that if there are variants in methodology between StatsCan and Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States when calculating each country's unemployment rate?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that question. Thank you for the question. Alors, le Canada et les...
Canada and the U.S. follow the guidelines established by the International Labor Organization and the UN to measure information from the labor market. So these directives do offer some flexibility so that each country can interpret that information according to their respective labor markets. Consequently, other indicators and unemployment are not always comparable between the two countries. And to be more specific, as for Canada and the US, we have a technical document on our website that explains the differences, and that explains the differences between the different surveys. And if I can just add one thing, when we distribute that,
our information, if the information from the United States has already been released, we do this adjustment to our own data in order to allow for the comparison with the United States.
Okay, that's very interesting. And in your opinion, is it accurate to make that one-to-one comparison between the two nations' employment rate, or would it be to some degree misleading to make the comparison of these absolute numbers?
So the answer to your question is really based on the fact that there are adjustments that need to be made in order to make sure that the concepts, so you can think of the population that we're measuring in terms of the age groups that we're trying to measure, as well as the reference period between the surveys. So once you've made those adjustments, then it is okay for us to publish the information.
So you have to make certain adjustments.
Yes.
But is there a better statistical calculation, like the labor force participation, that should be used when making comparison between Canada, United States, and other OECD countries?
So the unemployment rate is not the only indicator that we use in those comparison. One of them, as you said, is labor force participation. We also refer to that in our communiques, in our analysis.
I'm going to push the envelope a little bit more on this. Is it your expectation that the former Minister of Employment and Social Development Canada would know that there is a difference between how Canada and the United States calculates its unemployment rate?
I wouldn't be able to speculate on that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I find the disaggregated data quite interesting. I know last year StatsCan announced that they will be increasingly rely on disaggregated data. Can you explain how this process and what impacts it can have on our attempt to assist to help the most vulnerable in our society, especially the racialized population? I've heard a lot of input from those communities in my writing.
Thank you for the question. Alors, ce que je peux vous dire,
what I can tell you is that it's clear that the challenges that Canadians have to take on aren't the same. Depending on whether or not they're part of a diversity group, the pandemic has really highlighted these differences. Statistics Canada has been working to come up with a an overall idea of the diversity of the population, there are still significant gaps in the disaggregated data when it comes to certain economic indicators that are fundamental. One of the challenges we have is connected to the limited size of the samples. That sometimes limits our ability to come up with an accurate picture of employment rates or other labor indicators. Statistics Canada thinks it's important to work with various organizations, including not-for-profit organizations and the private sector and various ethnic cultural communities in order to put together joint initiatives for collecting data and other measures that allow them to get statistics that are more representative and improve its overall understanding of Canadians. And equally important, we also want to keep up our pan-Canadian approach and maintain our relationships with our federal partners to continue access to existing data, including disaggregated data. And of course, we think it's important to protect people's confidentiality. Thank you, Ms. Bégin.
Yeah,
I think
no,
my
that-
time's up. I just
it
want to
is
encourage
indeed.
you on this policy because it's very important to break down the systemic racism, a very important part of it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dong. Maintenant, Madame Chabot.
Now, Ms. Chabot, for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for offering your contributions on this study for a reform of the insurance employment system. I'd first like to address my questions to Canada Revenue Agency. Even though you told us that you don't administer the plan, you had administered a number of temporary and emergency benefits, and you listed those. And you can confirm this, but you'll probably still have to administer certain measures that were recently extended. And the tax season is upon us. You said that your challenge is to deliver these benefits in a timely manner. There were problems. There are people who expected a response for that 6 to 8 week window. There were also issues with the Quebec Parental Insurance Plan. In your opinion, are these waiting times? Are those something of the past now?
Maybe I could just make a couple of remarks there. I'm not probably some of those questions are best for ESDC. With respect to, as you pointed out, we are delivering the extension of the benefits with the CRB, the sickness benefit, and the caregiver benefit. So those 3 benefits we're delivering. The extension of the EI program is being delivered by ESDC. So that's certainly happening at the same time. You talked about some challenges, and I believe you were referring to challenges with respect to ESDC and delivery of some programs that take 6 to 8 weeks. I'd say, generally speaking, we're delivering our emergency benefit payments in 3 to 5 days.
That was 8 weeks.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Are you referring to a CRA delivery of benefits, or were you referring to ESDC?
Well, no, I wasn't talking about 7 to 8 days, but there are people who were unemployed, they had no income, and they had sent in an application for the benefit that you administer, and there were 8 weeks waiting period. That was for the CRB. So are those waiting periods behind us? And I know there's been an extension. Perhaps there's a short delay here because of interpretation. So that waiting period was absolutely intolerable for those individuals.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not aware of any of those type of waiting periods. Our system, the way it works is generally, if you apply and we deem you as qualified, we deliver that in 3 to 5 days. There are situations where individuals are deemed not to be qualified. They have to call and they may have to provide some additional documentation, and there can be delays in those cases. Are those acceptable wait times? If whether it's through CRA or whether it's ESDC, absolutely not. And as those things happen and evolve, we've quickly tried to reorganize ourselves to try to deliver to deal with those type of situations as quickly as possible. And to the extent that there were delays, it's always a tiny share, but it's an important. They're important files, and then we try to do what we can to speed that up as quickly as possible.
Madame Bégin.
Ms. Bégin, thank you for your testimony. My question has to do with the unemployment rates. Without getting into the detailed statistics, we know that with the current employment insurance plan, without any revised sections, the unemployment rates vary. Out of 62 socioeconomic regions in Canada, if I'm not wrong, there can be 2 different unemployment rates even in one region. For example, the lower North Shore and the upper North Shore. And so in terms of eligibility, well, this creates different criteria for EI beneficiaries. In terms of relaxing the rules, there was talk of using the same unemployment rate in all regions. This would be part of the solution, in our opinion. Do you think that could be a possible avenue that would improve eligibility, especially if we consider the last statistics that you gave us? Thank you, Ms. Chabot. Unfortunately, all questions that have to do with eligibility for EI, well, that really falls within ESDC's authority and not ours. Okay, then I'll ask the question otherwise. What challenges do you face when you try to determine the different unemployment rates in one region? I gave the example of the lower and upper North Shores in Quebec. There's similar situations elsewhere in the country. We know that this creates a problem. But what challenges do you face when calculating that? Very briefly, if possible, please. To answer your question, if we look at the labor force survey, we're talking about thousands of homes that we interview. We call them each month. And our sample is representative of the Canadian population, including of the regions. I would say that currently the greatest challenge we face is the rate of response to our surveys. We have to be within this hygiene rules and regulations, and of course interviewers aren't traveling to people's homes. Everything happens over the phone and electronically. Thank you, Ms. Chabot and Ms. Bégin. Next.
Turn for 6 minutes. Ms. Kazan,
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And my first questions are for either Annette Beautyfour, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, or Frank Vermaeten. From the transition between the CERB to the new COVID-19 support benefits, what is the percentage of Canadians who were eligible for CERB who are no longer eligible for the new support benefits? Either one? Okay.
Sorry, happy to answer. I don't have a statistic on that. The eligibility rules did not change significantly going from CERB to the CRB. Of course, there are the three benefits: the CRB, the sickness, the caregiver. So those rules changed. So it was a slightly different program, but generally speaking, there was not a big change in eligibility.
My
So
understanding was that 40%, only 40% were eligible for the EI benefit. Is that correct? No?
For the EI benefit, I'm
Yeah.
not sure what you're referring to.
Okay. If that could be sent to my office, I'd be interested in those percentages, if that's possible. During the pandemic, we see that the CERB kind of acted as a de facto guaranteed income program, something that I, along with thousands of others, Guaranteed Income Canada, Basic Income Canada, and Manitoba, and many others have been fighting for a long time to ensure that all Canadians have a livable income. With this in mind, what are there any lessons that the CRA learned in terms of its potential future ability to deliver a guaranteed livable basic income program? I ask that because we know we're going to be in the pandemic, it looks like, for a number of months still. And many people in terms of EI, we know that are running out of benefits. Like, how are we going to keep Canadians supported?
So that is a policy question. So I won't, it's not really our job within Canada Revenue Agency to comment on a policy such as the guaranteed annual income. I will say it's a challenge if I think about administering the CERB and the CRB. I mean, one of the big challenges is to determine eligibility. So in that case, it's to determine what is their level of income. And you have two types of workers. Let's say those that are perhaps EI eligible, that are working for an employer, and those that are self-employed. With respect to those that are employed, it's easier to know what kind of income they had. And if we had a system that provided very regular updates of that employment income, then that part of it would be less challenging to measure the income. With self-employed, it does become inherently more difficult to measure income and to measure effort. So when
it
you
becomes very bureaucratic, like the system the way it is.
Well, just challenging to when someone has a lower level of income. Why is that they have a declared lower level of self-employed income? Is it because of effort, lower effort, or is it because of changing market conditions, or what those conditions are? So isolating those effects become very challenging.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question. I've heard many from the disability community who do not think that the disability tax credit is a good policy instrument because it privileges those who are able to work, and even for those folks, it provides a very marginal value. If somebody has the disability tax credit, they can, for example, open an RDSP, which can be really beneficial, but again, it also privileges those who can afford to contribute to an RDSP. Would you agree with this assessment? And in your opinion, what are some of the alternative policy options that would benefit the most marginalized individuals in the disability community?
I'll just could say maybe a few words. Again, this is a policy area best directed to the Department of Finance or ESDC. The DTC is aimed for those that are have a severe disability, so it isn't for everyone, and it is considered a benefit that can provide a gateway to other benefits such as the RDSP. And I should note that the RDSP does have bonds and grant element to it, so to help those with lower income individuals. So I think the DTC is effective at identifying those with a severe disability and then provides a gateway. Of course, it's non-refundable, so therefore the benefit itself, it's not necessarily skewed to those that are working, but as far as the actual dollar value it provides, because it's non-refundable, it's only going to provide a benefit for those individuals that are taxable.
So just moving to that very quickly. So because I know that many people in the disability community have been advocating for a disability tax credit to be refundable. So which would result in a meaningful increase in income for many persons with disabilities who live far below the poverty line. Has this been considered? Do you know if this has been discussed?
Well, certainly it's an issue that's been discussed for many years. It was part of the Disability Advisory Committee report. There was that was mentioned in that report. With respect to the policy itself, that's certainly in the purview of the Department of Finance.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Vermaaten
much.
and Ms. Gazan. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Dancho for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. My first few questions are for Mr. Verbatim. Just concerning, it was touched on a little bit in the previous panel from my colleague, but I wanted to talk to you about this CRB EI issue. You mentioned, just for folks who aren't aware, there seems to be a bit of an issue. You mentioned with only a few people, but with folks that aren't eligible for EI to actually get the CERB, there seems to be some sort of tech issue at CRA that allows them sort of to roll into that program. And I think you were addressing this in your last in the last round, but that there weren't that many people, but it was happening. Can you do you have any concrete idea of how many people are impacted by this sort of technical issue?
Yeah, so I can certainly get you a number. It's quite small. It would be more, my guess would be in the low thousands. So, you know,
Okay.
when one takes the multi-million number of people that are
For sure.
applying, and I can certainly give you a simple example.
That's all right. I have a couple examples that have come to my attention, which is why I'm asking, because I wanted to see when the issue will be addressed. Do you have a timeline? Are you currently working on addressing this problem?
Absolutely, are working on it. We created a task force and we created a special unit with ESDC to be able to deal with those questions, so that people, if they are denied the CRB, they can call ESDC and essentially unblock that piece of data that prevents them from being able to get the CRB.
Okay, and that's available now, that call line?
It has started, yes.
It has started. Do you have the number offhand?
I do not.
Okay. All right, so we'd have to contact ESDC, I guess, to get that number then?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm pleased to hear it's not actually through CRA, because my next question was about the CRA call wait times, which I'm sure you've heard about till we're blue in the face. But I did want to address those with you. You know, we're hearing from across the country, many people are having issues. Normal years, tax season, people wait a couple hours sometimes on the phone. That's not necessarily abnormal, but it seems to be incredibly high even compared to normal tax season, where I'm hearing from folks, and I know this is MPs across the country, I'm sure everyone on this committee actually has probably had constituents complain about this issue, where they're waiting 3-4 hours and then they get an operator sort of saying, too busy, call back later, click, hang up, and then they have to start again. And now my concern is that these are folks that were promised money or supports from the federal government. The Liberal government has announced these things, but the problem is that thousands of people can't even get through to access them through CRA, and there's a whole host of technical things, as we know, that can go wrong of why people need to call CRA to get those benefits. But so it's easy to announce these things, but yet they're getting sort of roadblocked, some for weeks trying to get through. And I know you're aware of this issue. So can you explain to the committee the measures you're taking to sort of reduce these call wait times to a more, I would say, humane level?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly it is of great concern for us. Just to give you context, that the call demand is just unprecedented. Typical week, we might receive, same time last year, 350,000 calls. This time, we're receiving over 1 million calls. So the demand is just very large. We have ramped up our hiring. We're in the process of hiring over an additional 2,000 people. And so that gives us 1,500 more people than it did this time last year for the tax season. And we've got a couple of other processes in place that allows us, that will get those wait times down. Let me also just say one tiny thing. It is absolutely true that there are some people that are waiting a very long time. The average wait time tends to be around 25 minutes, but of course it's the outliers. It's often when people need to speak to to what we call a tier 2 or tier 3 agent, a specialist, that they have to wait this long. So it's very unfortunate.
I'm just going to ask a closing question. You mentioned that you're hiring 2,000 people. When did CRA start hiring these people?
That hiring would have started probably in November, I would say. It's hiring and training.
The only reason that I ask, and I find that a bit concerning that it didn't start till November. We've been in this pandemic, and this isn't on you, but we've been in this pandemic for almost a year now, and I'm just surprised that it took till November to start hiring 2,000 people. You would have thought, I mean, I would have thought that, last March when all of this was happening and you guys were administering CERB, and that you would have hired just droves and droves of people in anticipation of this. And we'll have to address that in Parliament, but I'm a bit disappointed to hear that hiring did not start until late fall, only a few months ago. So maybe that would explain why we're still experiencing considerable call volume times.
So here's the interesting thing. In fact, call wait times were very low in August and September and October. So things were manageable. There was a plan always to hire more people, and we always hire more people in the tax season, and there was a plan to hire more people than ever. What we saw as the second wave came, I think it's the second wave or perhaps the third wave, depending on how you count it, that call volumes and call handle time just went up really unexpectedly. And I'll point you to the call handle time, that it went up by 40%. A lot to do with theft, with identity theft, with the increased sophistication of cyber attacks. And that's really what has led to an unexpected demand, both in the number of calls and in the duration of those calls.
Thank you, Mr. Vermonten, and thank you, Ms. Doncho. Next, Mr. Vaughn, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. A couple of very quick questions, and if you don't have quick answers, a written submission is welcome. But what percentage of people pay into EI but are ineligible to receive to Stats Canada?
Vincent, would you like to address the question or start addressing the question?
Well, I probably can't I can't give you a very precise answer to your question. I can tell you that we do have a survey every year called the Employment Insurance Coverage Survey, which does look at the question of what proportion of people who have had a spell of unemployment.
If you could get us that information, just
so
what
I'd be happy
pay
to
that don't receive. Okay, and the flip to that is what percentage can't pay because of their employment status, but may need it, but therefore can't receive it because of the fact that they're self-employed or in the gig economy or in a seasonal employment situation. Okay. The second question is, do you know which province has the highest rate of ineligibility because of the way in which EI is designed?
Again, I don't have that information at hand, but we'd be happy to give you eligibility rates by province.
And could you also maybe give us all the provinces and territories just so we know who's got the lowest, and then correlate that to whether or not there's a high rate of seasonal industries in those communities? And do you split it between rural and urban? Is that a split that you give so we can understand whether or not the gig economy has a different footprint in EI versus the seasonal or more resource-based employment scenarios, which are driven by climate and season?
So we can certainly, everything is always subject to the size of our sample, but we can certainly do that as a custom tabulation to separate urban and rural.
And to preempt the chair's prerogative, if you could show that to PEI where you've got 4 zones and one very different zone to understand how it can model into a smaller community in a very different way, that would be helpful as well. In terms of CRA, we have heard previous testimony that the EI computer system runs on COBOL. Do you use COBOL at CRA as a computer language?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we do use COBOL in some of our systems. We also use Java, so we use a blend of technologies based on the platform and the type of system that we're developing.
You use COBOL to interface with EI, basically, though.
To interface with EI?
It's a legacy program, and those programs that haven't kept pace with CRA's computer evolution are tied to the old one. Therefore, you have to use COBOL too.
Not necessarily. There are different ways to interface with those types of systems. We can share files. They don't necessarily have to be processed in real time.
Okay.
And also there's a possibility to create architectures that allow you to share information across different systems that are using different technologies. So you're not limited to what another system may be using. Thank you.
But it would be fair to say that CRA's computer system, especially as you move to e-filing, was upgraded substantially in the last period of time, whereas other government systems have lagged behind, and that's also putting a bit of a drag on your systems.
Like all organizations, there's investments that are always being made to ensure our systems remain modern and can support the functionality of our programs. On an annual basis, we're assessing those systems based on obsolescence of technology, functionality, and then we determine how investments are made from that way forward.
Thanks. And in terms of a general question to CRA, what percentage of Canadians, we know this through the Canada Child Benefit and our frustrations at trying to reach as many families as possible with it, what percentage of Canadians don't file taxes that could file tax?
A large majority of Canadians do file, and
but there's a percentage that don't. What is that percentage?
But you'd want to look at the percentage that would file that potentially would be eligible for CCB, and I'll have to get the number, but it is I think over 95% that would file that are eligible for the CCB.
Is it safe to say that 5% is in precarious employment, is in low income employment, or has no income at all? The majority is caught there. It's not tax evasion. It's simply, I didn't earn, I didn't think I needed to file.
I think
or I don't want to file.
It's a combination of factors. For example, on First Nation reserves, sometimes there can be lower filing rates. Sometimes in remote areas, there can be lower filing rates. So there's a host of explanations.
So if we don't,
not a single one.
If we put a basic income program on the tax system and people don't file taxes, that's the very group that'll be just beyond the reach of basic income.
Yes, certainly. If you drive something off the tax system, filing's obviously going to be necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Thank you, Mr. Vermaten. Suite, Madame Chabot pour...
Now, Ms. Chabot, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Bégin. In your testimony, you said that there was a disproportionate impact of COVID on different industry combined with the relaxation of rules. And so this increases the proportion of women who receive benefits. Would you be able to give us statistics that compare those who can now get EI benefits because of relaxed rules versus the current rules that we're familiar with under the plan? Yes, Mr. Chair. Statistics Canada could provide that information following this meeting with the committee. Thank you. And could we also have, well, I won't ask you to take a stance on this, but everybody knows, well, specifically in the eastern regions of Quebec, that the help for seasonal workers, workers who are dependent on things like fishing and tourism, well, they were also very much impacted. And there was a black hole period for EI. Will the relaxed rules for EI contribute to improving that situation? Well, once again, I don't have that information on hand right now, but we can get a chart prepared and send that additional information to you. And that will be based on the different industries. I can't say exactly what we'll be able to do because it does depend on the size of the sample and the data that we have, but we can certainly see what can be provided after the meeting. That would be appreciated. Making a comparison between regions with the relaxed rules and with the eligibility rates, well, that will be very useful for us for our work on this reform. Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Chabot.
Ms. Gazan, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. My question is for Jose Bigan. Did I pronounce your last name properly? I feel like I'm teaching a university class again and slaughtering names at the beginning of a course. I apologize. I apologize for that. But you had mentioned previously that the portion of women who receive regular benefits has gone upward from 37% in February to 48% in December. Do you expect this number to continue to rise? And what will be the contributing factors to your knowledge? And which measures would be expected in order for this number to decrease?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to turn to my colleague Vincent to let him answer your question.
How do you pronounce your last name? Sorry.
Bégin.
Bégin. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay,
but that's
thank
okay.
you.
No worries.
So your question is asking me to speculate about the future, which is always treacherous. I can speak to what's been driving that, the balance between male and female in terms of the number of beneficiaries. One of the big factors is the differential impact of COVID-19 by industry. So if we think of industries like retail, trade, accommodation, and food services, a higher proportion of employment in those industries tends to be amongst women. So one of the things we would want to look for as the labor market continues to evolve and recover is the degree to which those specific industries either recover or continue to be affected by public health restrictions. So to summarize, a big factor will be the performance of specific industries where female employment tends to be higher.
And just very quickly, what is the current estimate of employed individuals who are not eligible for employment insurance? And what is the demographic makeup? Women, men, 2S, LGBTQIA, BIPOC?
So we don't have that. We have that through the Employment Insurance Coverage Survey, and I could provide you the most recently available statistics on that. We can send out to the committee after the meeting today. Unfortunately, I don't have at hand the very up-to-date numbers on that.
Thank you, Ms. Gazan.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we're going to leave it there so that we get a full hour with the next panel as well. So I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us here today. Thank you for your service, especially at such a difficult time when the public service is very much put in the limelight. We also appreciate the various undertakings that you've given to provide further information in writing to the committee. And if at the risk of being bold, the written information that you provide will help inform us in the examination of further witnesses. So we're happy to receive it piecemeal if you can provide some of it promptly and the rest takes a little more time. But as soon as you can get it to us, that increases the value that we will have and its impact on for the work of the committee. So thanks again so much for being with us. We'll bid you adieu now, and we're going to suspend for 3 minutes while we bring in the next panel and test their mics. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Meeting on our study of the review of the employment insurance program. I would like to make just a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses. Before speaking, you need to click on your microphone icon to activate your mic. Interpretation in this video conference will be like a regular committee meeting. You have the choice on the bottom of your screen of floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, please put your mic on mute. So I'd now like to welcome our witnesses to continue our discussion. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and that will be followed by rounds of questions. We have with us today Miles Korak, a professor of economics, Graduate Center, City University of New York, and from the C.D. Howe Institute, Parisa Mahubi, Senior Policy Analyst. We're going to start with Mr. Korak, please, for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me all right then?
Sure can.
All right. Bonjour tout le monde. Évidemment, je suis très heureux de...
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about a topic that's become more and more important.
That employment insurance has been found wanting. Many Canadians have experienced that for decades, and now is well beyond the time to do something about it. The government can proceed immediately with a series of important changes that are well within its administrative capacity, but it also must proceed with an eye to more fundamental changes in the near term that may require more consultation. I'll outline 6 proposals, 3 that are immediate and another 3 that are near-term possibilities for you to consider. But let me tell you something I don't think Canadians need more of. They don't need more platitudes about getting a better education, about getting more training. The EI program already transfers about $3 billion to the provinces for programs of this sort. Some are effective, some less so. But the government doesn't need to spend more money on training through EI and putting more responsibility on individuals to adjust to the storms of a turbulent labor market. Canadians, my point is, need better and more complete income insurance, and my suggestions are directed to this need. 3 policies for the short term that I believe the government can immediately implement in the next budget. The first considers qualifying for benefits with the last ROE. I suggest that the government, that this committee, and that the government consider the reason for separation from only the last record of employment in a series used to support a claim. The administration of the program should ignore the reasons in previous ROEs and allow qualification if shortage of work was the reason for separation in the most recent ROE. Currently, many workers in a precarious situation trying to piece together jobs and incomes find themselves falling into an administrative rabbit hole because past ROEs have been incorrectly completed by employers or separations are worker initiated. Focusing on the reason for separation in just the last ROE will simplify a needlessly complicated process. Second suggestion to you is offer a close to uniform entrance requirement. There are 62 EI regions with the number of hours of work required to qualify for benefits determined by region-specific unemployment rates. Unemployment rates that fall into 9 bands ranging from 6%, less to 6% to over 13%. This is why le trou noir exists in some regions. We tie narrowly defined regional unemployment rates so finely to EI eligibility because we treat the program as a regionally based program of income support with some work conditions attached. This amounts to a type of basic income for many people living in regions east of the Ottawa River. Laudable as this goal is, it has distorted the insurance function of employment insurance. It has excluded many Canadians from coverage, and it has slowed the response to big labor market shocks. It means a 1/10 of a percentage point change in the unemployment rate can change eligibility for the program. This level of precision amounts to letting statistical fog influence eligibility. It also means that to reduce the statistical fog, Statistics Canada relies on an average of regional unemployment rates in the past 3 months. This further corrupts the ability of the program to respond quickly to sudden changes in the job market. Eligibility rules are hardwired to be backward-looking. There have been long-standing calls for a uniform entrance requirement, and currently that's the situation we're in. A reasonable alternative is to reduce the current 9 bands to just 3, say less than 6%, 6 to 10%, and greater than 10%. Finally, the third immediate policy change that the government can introduce is to increase the benefit rate and the maximum insurable earnings. The benefit rate is currently 55%, meaning that an EI claimant receives 55 cents for every dollar of insured earnings. Historically, this was 66 2/3%, and it's as high as 80%, and was as high as 80% for certain categories of claimants. Successive reforms cut the benefit rate, and these cuts were often done in the name of deficit fighting and work incentives. These past priorities don't serve our present and future well. It is both feasible and timely to raise the benefit rate and offer workers better insurance by covering more of their past earnings. Let me jump to 3 other policies that refer to things the government can do in the near term that will probably require more consultation. The first is to enhance coverage and step toward a basic income by integrating the Canada Workers Benefit with the EI program. The fact that only 40% of the unemployed qualify for employment insurance in the best of times, and the perception that the future of work will involve more contingency, more precarity in work arrangements, has led many to both question the eligibility rules of EI and its limited capacity to cover the self-employed. It has also led them to call for a basic income of some sort. Not all of the self-employed should be covered by EI, and dividend income surely should not. Further, the gig economy is not, nor will it be, a terrible reality for many. But both self-employment and employment as an independent worker will increasingly become last-ditch or supplemental means of support for many workers in precarious situations. There is certainly a role for changes in regulatory policies and clarifications of the class of workers, but income support and income insurance policies can respond by focusing more on ensuring incomes rather than jobs or particular classes of jobs. The Canada Workers Benefit remains a relatively modest program. Individuals living on their own must have at least $3,000 in earned income to qualify for a maximum benefit of about $1,400. The jobs used to earn this income, including self-employment, do not necessarily lead to qualifying hours under EI. I suggest that any income used to support the receipt of the Canada Workers Benefit be converted to EI eligible hours without regard to the nature of the job used to obtain that income. This will bring the self-employed that we might legitimately worry about into EI coverage, as well as others in contingent work. If this committee were to consider recommending a considerable enhancement in the generosity of the Canada Workers Benefit, with, say, an unconditional payment of $12,000 to $15,000, equivalent to the deep income poverty line, and a maximum benefit that lifts workers to the official poverty line, then it will have taken 2 considerable steps forward. It will offer a way of significantly increasing the coverage of employment insurance for workers who need the insurance, but it'll also take a significant step in establishing a basic income for single workers and those without children who need the support, much in the way that the Canada Child Benefit and the OAS GIS offer a basic income to families with children and other Canadians.
Okay, Mr. Korak, I'll get you to wrap up. We're well past time. Thanks.
I will do that. Thank you. This is what I mean by integrating the Canada Workers Benefit with EI. 2 other recommendations, just to list them, Mr. Chair. Offer wage insurance to long seniority workers who are permanently laid off. This was in the government's, or Mr. Qualtroux's mandate letter. It is a form of wage insurance. And the final recommendation I put to you is to offer special benefits through individual accounts with maternity and parental benefits in a complementary family insurance program under the EI Act. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Korak. I have no doubt that you'll get a chance to amplify those points through the questions that'll be posed by the committee. Next, Ms. Mambubi, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable committee members. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today. The pandemic has exposed existing gaps in our employment insurance program and the need for potential EI reform to build a sustainable income support system. Today, I'd like to highlight gaps related to eligibility requirements and provide recommendations to enhance access to benefits. Evidence shows that the pre-pandemic access conditions do not provide a broad coverage to support all Canadians who need financial assistance. For example, part-time workers, new entrants to the labor market, and workers in low unemployment regions are less likely to meet minimum required insurable hours to qualify for EI. Labor market statistics shows that the crisis has affected hourly paid low-wage workers the most. These statistics highlight the importance of recent temporary changes to EI requirements to expand eligibility and to fill coverage gaps in employment insurance by reducing insured hours required and making enhanced requirements more similar across regions. Several studies have previously suggested a reform to harmonize EI eligibility. One reason is that this change would provide better support for part-time workers, since workers in regions with a low unemployment rate need to accumulate more hours, making it harder for part-timers to qualify. The recent data on regular employment insurance and unemployment shows that beneficiary to unemployment ratio can be seen as a measure of EI coverage has increased by about 36 percentage points over a 12-month period to 75% in December 2020. This is a significant increase and a high EI coverage, given that a large number of unemployed Canadians, such as gig workers, do not contribute to EI. Since the previous recession in 2008-2009, the so-called gig economy and platform work have been growing mainly due to rapid economic changes related to technological progress, globalization, and demographic changes. The growth of gig and non-standard work can have important role in post-COVID-19 economic recovery, but there are concerns about the lack of financial security and predictability, paid sick leave, other benefits. Previous City Hall Institute research highlights the idea that Canada should focus on policies that provide proper supports for workers in non-traditional jobs, for example, through an expanded employment insurance system while maintaining a dynamic labor market. Currently, the Canada Recovery Benefit attempts to address the income support challenges of these workers, but the program is temporary while the concerns about income-related stability and uncertainty are not. While an EI system that covers gig workers and the self-employed may be desirable, it is not clear how to build that system. For example, there are workers who have experienced substantial earning losses without job loss, and self-employed whose earnings can be negative. Besides, a challenge is to define the time period in which earning losses and benefits are evaluated for eligibility of self-employed. EI programs that ensure various forms of unemployment needs to ensure earnings in a more flexible way, but it will reshape the labor market, distorting decision of businesses, employees, and the self-employed in a way that may or may not be desirable. In conclusion, for a broader and further reaching eligibility increase, the government needs to consider a program that offers a lower yet geographically more uniform hours-based requirement. However, more research and better data are needed to build an EI system for the 21st century that includes all forms of employment. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mahboubi. We are going to begin now with questions, beginning with Ms. Dancho for the Conservatives for 6 minutes. You have the floor, Ms. Dancho.
Mr. Clerk, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I found your opening remarks very interesting, and I have a few questions for Mr. Korak. I had reviewed your letter to the Minister, Minister Qualtrough from October 19th, 2020, and I found your idea about an EI special benefits account very interesting. You touched on it a little bit in your opening remarks, but I just had a few questions and was hoping you can expand on it. So my understanding from your note is that it would be similar to how individual EI premiums would be allocated to their own account, much in the same way as the Canada Pension Plan, really financed on their work history. You mentioned that everyone would be free to use their account to support a period of time away from work, whenever, for whatever reason, and for whatever length of subject to balance in the account. I was just wondering how you felt that this would work in another pandemic, if you felt that this would be helpful. I'm just wondering, my point being is that some of the problems with the EI account now is that people didn't work enough to pay into it. So would we see a similar problem with your proposal, or am I missing something?
Thank you for the question. First of all, you're correct. Everything is conditional on eligibility for the program. So given that we've worked on that, then families face two types of risks. They face risks associated with their jobs, and they face all sorts of family associated risks, be it sickness, caregiving, and so on. My view is that all of the contributions of employers should fall into supporting regular benefits, and all the contributions that workers make should go into their own accounts. I feel this is important because it gives people agency. Right now, these accounts have layer upon layer of unanticipated needs put on them by the government, each with a whole set of regulations, making it very complicated, even to the point that in the most turbulent times in a person's life, when someone close to them is dying, the government asks them to provide a doctor's note to access benefits. If you just gave them an account, it would make things a lot simpler.
Yeah, and I think you put it really well when you said, yeah, individual accounts for family events that are truly unforeseeable would have the dual purpose of recognizing that individual citizens know their own needs and circumstances better than politicians. I really appreciated that line because I would very much agree. But then you also mentioned, while also promoting incentive compatible behavior. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. Could you expand on that?
What I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't get into assessing the reasons for the use of these accounts. Let people do whatever they want. However, does that mean I get to just quit whenever I want and go skiing in Banff? Well, not if I don't have anything in my account, not if I haven't worked for it. And that's what I meant by incentive compatibility.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And you mentioned as well earlier in the article or in your note that this reform of EI would start with a careful assessment of what is and what is not demographic risk. I wasn't sure what that meant.
Well, just to be clear, maternity and parental benefits are still as part of special benefits. I'm not sure that that is an insurable risk in the same sense. And I'm not sure that we can handle that with special individual accounts. It would take time to build these accounts up, particularly early in your work history, probably when you are in the middle of family formation. And that's why I suggest that maternal and parental benefits be hived out of this altogether and treated as a special program in the EI Act.
I thought that was a very interesting idea as well. So if I'm understanding you correctly, sort of someone who falls ill or has to care for someone or falls into unemployment, they're laid off, whatever, very different than if you're going to have a baby or if your wife or partner is going to have a baby. Is that sort of what you're saying? And so we should not be blocking those together in this sort of idea that you have.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you see any sort of advantages or sort of general disadvantages or advantages of this? I mean, and you've outlined a number of them, but I'm just wondering, sort of in practical terms, how you would see this rolling out. Let's say we have another pandemic in a year from now. How would you see this roll out if it was in a perfect world, your idea sort of was implemented?
Well, I think this would give people a great deal of flexibility. The future is unknown. We've learned that both at the societal level and the individual level, and allow people to access their accounts when they need it for what they need it. The problem is these accounts need to also be funded at some base level for everybody. And I suggest in that case that just as we have in our pension system a floor below which we don't let the elderly fall, OAS and GIS, there should be a flat government contribution to these accounts that is funded through the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Then people build up these accounts with their own earnings, just as they build up their CPP benefits through their earnings. And then finally, if they have any savings, they can self-insure.
Yeah, it sounds like your idea has a lot of sort of personal autonomy, agency, as you mentioned. So it's an intriguing idea, and I appreciate you sort of elaborating a little bit further on it, and certainly appreciate the thought that went into your note. We have about 30 seconds left. Is there anything else you'd like to say about this idea?
It would simplify things in terms of the debate we're going through now with sickness benefits, for example. And the other thing is, quite rightly, MPs bring issues to the EI system as they become aware, as we get better publicity. And so now we've just sort of layered so many different types of programs and required so many different regulations and information. These accounts would simplify that. And it would be, I think, a positive way of understanding agency in the context of demographic risks.
Yeah, less red tape. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Korak. I appreciate your remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Tancho. Next, Mr. Long, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you to Ms. Mahboubi and Mr. Korak for your presentations. Very, very interesting. Ms. Mahboubi, I wanted to talk to you first, and just with respect to CERB. I mean, we all know that CERB was created to, give income to those who lost employment during the pandemic in the quickest way possible. And I think that we can all look back really remarkably with a sense of pride as how quickly it did get out to so many people. As CERB ended, obviously, there was a transition to, the simplified EI program for those who were eligible, and then obviously the CRB. So in your opinion, what would have been the consequence of continuing the CERB and not relaunching a simplified and more generous EI program?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about that topic. City Hall. Sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. City Hall published extensive, we published through commentaries and intended memo and talk about that, why it was really important to have that transition. Or if we wanted to extend CERB, we needed to reform that program because the intent, when CERB was created and introduced, the purpose was to keep people inside their house. The purpose was to stop working, stop doing other things, and stay at home to keep people safe. But as economy start to reopen and businesses start to reopen, there was a problem with CERB because it didn't create an incentive to look for employment. And because, as I mentioned, the majority of those individuals lost their job and have seen a reduction in the hours, they were mostly about low-income individuals. So CERB was a program that was quite desirable for these individuals. So with receiving CERB without being required to look for employment, of course, it's going to create some challenges for businesses to find right individuals to work for them, and there was no requirement to look for employment. So if we wanted to stick to CERB, it had to be reformed. It needed to take into consideration several elements of EI program. But of course, moving to EI program was the better option when government was ready to shift those big portion of individuals into the program.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Korak, thanks for your presentation. And I know I'm a former small business owner and self-employed. And I know you've talked about gig work and things, but I just want to ask you, are you aware of some of the best practices internationally for insuring the self-employed?
Not as well versed as I should be on that, Mr. Long. There are officials at ESDC that can really speak to some of the innovations in the Netherlands and in other countries in Europe, but I think I'd be a little bit out of my scope. I guess my own feeling is that we can get into a great deal of difficulties trying to classify workers. The workers we care about are people who are
you trying to get in here?
I'm
trying
sorry.
to come in?
The workers that we care
sorry.
about are those who are
sorry, that's about my cat. I'm so sorry.
The workers who are self-employed, who are sort of using self-employment as a last-ditch attempt to piece together income. Not so much the risk-taking entrepreneur is what I sort of have in mind when I think about those two things.
Okay, thank
2 minutes left there, Mr. Long.
Yeah, Chair, I'll yield the rest of my time to MP Turnbull.
Thanks, Mr. Long. Thank you, and thanks to both the witnesses. Mr. Korak, maybe I'll start with you. I think you've said that a 21st century employment insurance system should respond to big shocks in real time. And I know that you've said that EI eligibility rules respond with a significant lag when there is sharp changes in the unemployment rate. What do you propose to make in terms of changes to the EI system to make it more responsive in this manner?
Thank you. That's absolutely correct. As I tried to outline in my opening remarks, because we have so many regions, we are stretching the capacities of Statistics Canada's survey instrument to its very limit. And so Statistics Canada wants to give you the best signal as possible. And so it uses a 3-month average of past unemployment rates. So what we saw in this pandemic, what we saw in Alberta when the oil prices bottomed out, and also in Saskatchewan when potash prices collapsed, what we saw in the Great Recession was an employment insurance system that was looking backwards. When the pandemic hit, it was still January's unemployment rate that was helping to determine eligibility for the program. My suggestion is to make the bands that determine the eligibility rules much wider, or to cut back on the number of regions for a type of special benefit. Just use provincial employment rates or urban versus rural in a province. Statistics Canada can give us provincial employment rates on a monthly basis. And I think that would be hardwiring a quicker real-time facility into EI rather than fossilizing it by being backwards looking when important things happen quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Korak. And Mr. Turnbull, next, suite Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Chabot for 6 minutes. Thank you very much to our witnesses. This is very insightful for us. For Mr. Korak, I'll make this brief. Well, we are here to review what elements should be part of a reform to make sure that eligibility to the EI plan be as broad as possible. And we want to restore this idea of a social safety net. And as you said, the pandemic hit us hard, and this plan had not been adapted. In terms of unemployment rates, did I understand that, if I understood you properly, it could be a solution to abolish these 62 administrative regions and to put in place a minimum unemployment rate for all regions, the 62 regions? That's kind of what the government did by modeling its EI plan this way. Is this a solution that you think would be a good one? Thank you, madam. If I may, I'll answer in English.
Arguing that we should rewrite the regional map. I think that would be a political challenge. But in some measure, you could render it less relevant for some aspects of the program. The regions and the regional unemployment rates could still determine the duration of benefits, but maybe they should play less of a role in determining entry into the program. The government has currently, and this seems like a temporary measure, suggested that everyone should have the same eligibility rule. And my colleague from the CDHOW has suggested the importance of that. I'm suggesting perhaps go part way, perhaps just 3 ranges of unemployment rates. And that, in that sense, Madame Chabot, that would render the regional map less significant for getting into the program, but not necessarily for the duration of benefits.
Well, because the 4 regions, according to the unemployment rate, it defines the number of hours, 420 to 120 hours. And if we look at the plan currently, women and young people whose work is part-time, well, it's harder for them to qualify, even if you pay into EI, because it takes longer to accumulate 420 hours when you have a part-time job, only 15 hours a week, than when you have a 40-hour work week. So, in our opinion, that has to be brought down, but I want to know what your opinion is so that there would be broader eligibility to the plan. Yes, exactly.
Though is, I think we should think of the Canada Workers Benefit as an important complement to EI. For people with part-time work, for part hours, that they don't otherwise qualify, we would catch them through the Canada Workers Benefit. Then we would convert that income, whatever they earned, into eligible hours. Right now, there's no discussion or integration between these two programs. You can easily solve the problem of the 60% of the unemployed who are not eligible for EI by offering this complementary program. At the same time, right now, what you have is a situation in which the eligibility rules vary according to each percentage change in the unemployment rate. So if a region moves from 8.9% to 9%, that changes eligibility rules. A 1/10 of a percentage point changes is just statistical fog. It has really no meaning. And why should it play a role in determining eligibility? So I suggest using just 3 bands. If the unemployment rate is less than 6%, if it varies between 6 and 10, and if it's greater than 10%, and leave it at that. But to cover off the many people who don't qualify, that's where you would use the Canada Workers Benefit, which now is makes automatic quarterly payments to the whole host of people, and just convert their income into hours so that they can then graduate, if you will, to the EI system.
For
the benefits rate, you said it's at 55%. At the beginning of the EI plan, it was much higher, and it went down over the time because of different restrictive policies. What rate do you think it should be at?
It was 66 2/3%. I'm not sure where to put the number in the increase, but it should increase. And the other thing you should note is that if you're making above the maximum insurable earnings, it's even less than that. What does the future of work involve? It probably involves people in the service sector, relatively high paid people, facing the kinds of risks that manufacturing workers faced in the 1990s as globalization rolled through the heartland of Ontario and Quebec and decimated work. If you can work wherever you want, how long is it going to take before your boss to wonder, maybe anyone can do the work you do? There'll be a whole series of contracting out that could happen and put people higher up in the wage scale at risk. When they fall into unemployment, they will find that this system in which they paid into all their lives is going to give them 25% or less of their earnings. You're not preparing people for the future of work if you don't offer better insurance, and increasing the benefit rate and the maximum insurable earnings is a way to do it. Though I have to admit, I'm not in a position to put a number on that yet. I think you would want to balance that with what financial constraints the government faces.
Thank you, Mr. Korak. Merci, Madame Chabot. Next, Ms. Gazan, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Korak. In your presentation, you mentioned, and certainly I think the committee knows a real interest and passion of mine, a guaranteed livable basic income. And we know that there's a breadth and depth of expertise which exists on the topic of basic income as a form of income insurance. And as a partner to EI, do you believe that the information, and this is one of the frustrations I've had about basic income, is being properly understood and acknowledged?
I think there's naturally a good deal of confusion about this topic. I'm confused by it as well. The way I make sense of it is basic income, the why, and basic income, the how. I think everyone's agreed on the why. I mean, there are different rationale. We want basic income to make the administration of benefits simpler. We want basic income to fight poverty. We want basic income to foster solidarity, community, and family. Those are all laudable goals. I think most people agree on them. I think where the differences come from is confusion over basic income, the how. And when this debate began in Canada, basic income was seen as a universal payment to everybody, regardless of their station in life. I think the basic income community has evolved tremendously, and I don't think many hold that view. They are looking for something like, let's say I am looking for something like a Canada Child Benefit. We have a basic income for families with children. It's called the Canada Child Benefit. They are looking for something like OAS, GIS. We have a basic income for the elderly. What we're missing is that important segment of our population who are in midlife, mid-career, on their own, have had family challenges, have had work challenges. But I encourage you to use the instruments available to you. The Canada Workers Benefit is a nascent basic income. I would add to it an unconditional payment, just like the Canada Child Benefit, that would keep people above the deep poverty line, say $12,000 to $14,000 a year, depending upon region. I would enhance the supplement for work to bring people up to the poverty line, and then I would taper off benefits as income grows further. So it's just a question, I think, if the committee and the government used the instruments it has at hand, and you would cover through these different tiers what we think of as the basic income, as what economists put as a negative income tax.
Okay, so it's obvious that the current EI system needs to be revised. We had people testify before committee last week, but we also need to recognize that the current definitions of work are outdated, certainly something that impacts my writing significantly, and therefore many people fall through the cracks of the existing system. I often refer to people that are dealing, for example, with severe mental health and trauma that often end up on the streets living in destitute poverty. And we know that many populations living poor, living rough, are overrepresented by women, racialized people, disabled people, Indigenous people, millennials and Zoomers, as well as older folks. Do you believe that another form of income insurance as a partner to EI would be helpful? For example, an income-tested guaranteed livable income. I mean, you spoke a little bit, but if you want to expand on that, and how a guaranteed livable basic income could work in partnership with EI.
Thank you. But that's exactly what I'm suggesting, and thanks for the opportunity to expand on it. That's what I see the Canada Workers Benefit being. Now, this said, I mean, people face all kinds of challenges in their lives, and money is not everything. There is an important interface with the provinces that has to happen here. But I see converting the Canada Workers Benefit into, as I suggested, an unconditional component that is independent of your work status, and then that is tiered to the amount of income you have. Earlier, there were issues raised about whether people file their taxes. So this would only capture people who are in the system. So we still need advocates for many people. We still need the provinces to be engaged and the municipalities to be engaged in an important way. So this is an important area in which I think the federal and provincial governments should interface. And you don't have to worry about classifying someone as a gig worker or self-employed. The point is their income is just too low. We have a poverty reduction strategy. They fall through the cracks.
I really appreciate certainly your insight on this. One of the issues I currently have with, for example, EIA in Manitoba is it's punitive, it's stigmatizing. Guaranteed income programs would just look at income. You wouldn't have to go through an interrogation process to have minimum human rights met. Am I understanding this correctly?
I think one of the things that we've learned over the course of the pandemic, and this is why people saw CERB as being very successful, is the ease of application, the agency that people had. That has to be paired, of course, with accountability to the public purse. But if we can simplify EI, if we can simplify income support, that will add not only to administrative, remove administrative burden, it'll offer people dignity and it'll offer them real-time benefits in real time.
Thank you so
Mr.
much.
Correct. Thank you, Ms. Gazan. Next, Ms. Falk, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank both of our witnesses for being here today, too. I know that both of you have done a lot of work analyzing employment insurance well before the pandemic. And I guess I have a question for both of you to start off with. I'm just wondering what measures can or should be built into the EI program to ensure that it provides meaningful support to an unemployed person without creating a disincentive to work. So I wonder if Ms. Mahboubi would like to start first, maybe?
Thank you. In terms of creating an employment income that provides support to Canadians, I would say the first feature or the first parameter that we need to look at it, we need to consider about the coverage. The proportion of Canadians could have access to AI program when they lose their job, or if we're going to have some sort of modernized EI program, maybe in the future, talking about not only income employment loss, maybe some sort of income loss. But as I said, this is a topic that is very complicated, and we need lots of investigation data to be able to think about how we can reform EI program to think about consideration about income loss. But in general, in terms of benefit, I guess focus on coverage is more important than the amount of benefit, because we want at least those individuals, when they don't have any other option, they don't have any income, to be able to have access to some sort of support rather than nothing. And and after that, after we are making sure that individuals receive some sort of supports, we can have a better discussion about whether it's enough or not. So I believe the main parameters of reforming EI program would be about how eligibility criteria in terms of how it can support more Canadians, more individuals who contributed to the program. This is something that I believe this is important. And in terms of, for example, regional variation, the reason that I believe that we should eliminate that feature from EI program is that, for example, with remote working, right now we are facing changes in the nature of work. We are seeing borderless labor markets. So if we are moving in that direction, and we want to modernize our EI program, so it means that we need to look at the way that labor market is changing, the way that the nature of work is changing. As I said, for example, remote working. So you can physically place in one location and work for an organization or for in different region and different province or even different countries. So these questions also we need to take into consideration when we are going to reform EI program.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Mr. Cork? Do you have anything to add?
Thank you for the question, Madame Falk. The question of work incentives very much influence the current shape of the EI system we have now. I have perhaps two concerns about that. I think incentives matter when it comes to the impact on geographic mobility. And as my colleague just mentioned, maybe in the future that's going to be less important. And the second is the intergenerational disincentives, as perhaps knowledge of the program or use of the program is passed across generations and families. And this is very much wrapped up with the incentives embodied in EI on the demand side of the labor market. I think we need to pay more attention to how firms interact with EI to understand the efficiency and disincentive consequences. EI has long been a form of regional income distribution and cross-industry distribution, with the extractive industries and constructions industry benefiting a lot more than other industries. But I don't think we often recognize that even within industries, there's always a set of firms that receive subsidies through the program. And this may have an impact on the capacity for firms to grow and the efficiency of the economy in the long run. And it's unfortunate that we don't pay more attention to the demand side of the labor market.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Young, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much to our witnesses here today. Very interesting. I wanted to start by asking Ms. Mabubi if she could talk about people with disabilities and how any change in EI reform would impact people with disabilities, and her concerns about wanting a more holistic approach to working and helping people with disabilities.
Thank you. Absolutely. When we look at the disability issues, so definitely individuals with disability, they face significant barriers to labor market participation and employment, and often even if they are employed, although it really depends on the level of severity of the disability. So, but general, often we see that they earn less and their labor force participation is less than others, and even in terms of employment, and they face higher unemployment rate. So exactly, when we talk about regional variation in terms of unemployment rate, so unemployment rate for different population also is different, or it could be even it would be kind of similar in all regions, because all disabled people, they face barriers to employment. So individuals, if we have one disabled person in Ontario and for example in Toronto, and we have another one in a different region with high employment rate, they both face similar barriers to employment, and it's difficult equally for them to find employment. So that's why, again, that's really good to mention that we need to also to think about the barriers that different population groups are facing to find employment, and if they lose their employment, also how EI program can support that. I have written about the role of social assistance and how it can help a disabled person to attach them to the labor market. For example, currently, some of the programs we have in terms of social assistance programs, they don't provide great incentives for disabled people to look for employment and to tackle their barriers. Yes, of course, it's going to be difficult for some because the challenges they are facing is significant, but it's not something that it's not something like 0 and 1. It's not if people can work or cannot. There are some sort of spectrum here, and some people, they are able to participate. But when we design EI program, we need to think about those individuals, disabled people, women with young children, and others. Different type of individuals may face different barriers to the labor market.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Corrick, would you have some comments on how we should look at people with disabilities and under the employment insurance program and whether what you're saying could help them in any way?
For the most part, I defer to Madame Mahoubi on this, Madame Young. I would just reiterate my suggestion that special benefits might be structured in a much more flexible way to give people agency and control. I don't feel sometimes disabilities come and go, and we can't anticipate that as well. And maybe these special accounts will give people that kind of agency.
Mr. Corrick, you have your work underpins the research of one of our colleagues, our parliamentary colleagues, on the economic phenomenon of the Great Gatsby curve. I hate to ask you a question that you probably only have a minute to answer, but could you summarize what the Great Gatsby curve is?
Thank you for that. The bottom line is that we should be worried about inequalities in our society, all sorts of inequalities, because ultimately they shape opportunities. And different types of inequalities shape opportunity in a different way. Now, the Great Gatsby curve is a relationship across countries in which the most unequal countries are, if you will, the most class-bound countries, where it's hardest to get ahead in life and privilege is protected. So Canada, for example, is much more socially mobile than the United States, in part because of our healthcare system, in part because of the high quality of our education system, in part because of an open and efficient labor market that rewards talents. But it doesn't mean we have challenges. So the Great Gatsby curve sort of stresses the importance of fighting poverty and inequality to allow the next generation to prosper.
Thank you, Mr. Corrick.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Young. Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demie.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Chabot. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Corrick. For you, I just want to make sure I've understood you on the plan. Especially when you were talking about special benefits. We know that there's the regular plan, and then there are all the special benefits, including maternity and sickness. We know that in a case like seasonal work or maternity leave, EI is not linked to a loss of job, but rather a certain condition. Is your idea that we separate the plan into distinct programs? One for in the event would you lose a job, and then another one where it's not a loss of job?
View. So let me perhaps rephrase this. When the 1971 legislation was written, every dollar that an employee contributed to unemployment insurance, as it was then called, the employer contributed $1.40. The reason for that? Well, for every person that quit, there were 1.4 people that were laid off. And so we were trying to tie contribution rates to who caused the separation, the employer or the worker. Since that time, we've removed quitters from the program, but people are still paying their dollar. What's happened is special benefits have risen in importance. So all I want to do is take that dollar and give people ownership over it and let them use it in the way that's best for them. The program would still function as it is. We would just simplify and reorganize the special benefits side. You know, it's very good what we've done with special benefits. We never know when a child will fall ill. We never know when a mother or father, an elderly mother, father will fall ill. But we never know when a teenage child is diagnosed with schizophrenia. Are you going to start another program for that? We never know all sorts of other contingencies. And because we don't know, just give people agency over the use of their funds. Obviously, I'm also calling for a bit of a return to tripartite financing. In 1971, the federal government was a contributor to the EI fund because there was a collective risk and it should be faced collectively. Just like in the pandemic, it was a collective risk and the federal government had to step up to pay. And so some of these special benefits need to be funded collectively as well, some fraction of them. But the program stays intact. It's just simplifying and redesigning special benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Korak and Madame Chabot. Next, Ms. Gazan, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And Mr. Korak, I really appreciated your discussion around, even caring for sick loved ones. And I know that the NDP, this is something we've been advocating for years to increase, for example, even around sick, we never know what can happen in life, to increase the number of EI sickness benefit permanently from 15 weeks to 50 weeks. And this idea actually also received support in this committee in a 2016 study on EI, especially for individuals undergoing cancer treatments, for example. Is this a measure you would support? I bring this up as well because we are now in a pandemic. We know people have gotten very sick during the pandemic. We don't know what that's going to look like for them going forward in terms of healing and being able to return to work. Is this a measure that you would support?
At the risk of losing some of your time, I get Madame Gazan, I need a little bit of clarification. I missed exactly what it is you want me to support. A previous proposal?
Yeah, no, like to increase the duration of time for an EI sickness benefit from 15 to 50 weeks.
Okay. Well, I can't speak to that specific issue, but as you pointed out, life is full of uncertainties. I mean, even last February, we didn't know what was going to be happening in March and April, and look how our lives have changed. And since we can't anticipate that, this is why I feel that people should be allowed to build up their funds and use them for however long they want. Now, there's always a risk that these funds will dry up, and we can't leave people just totally in the lurch. But you could think of it as sort of like a forced savings account, a TFSA, if you will, and you would pay it back later if you had to use more than you had. So I think what I feel uncomfortable with your proposal is we've got another rule with another date that's going to be fixed. Things could be different. And I'm just looking for a more flexible way to address this important need that demographic risks, family risks matter as much as workplace risks sometimes.
Very much agreed. I agree with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gazan. And colleagues, we are pretty much bang on the 5:30 Eastern hour, so I'm going to wrap it there. And to Ms. Mahboubi and Mr. Korak, this has been a fascinating and illuminating discussion. Thank you so much for your expertise. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the comprehensive way that you've answered the questions. This will, I think, help frame the questioning of further witnesses that come before us, but most certainly help frame our thinking as we delve into this issue. So very, very grateful for your expertise this evening. Colleagues, if there is nothing further to come before the committee, do we have the consensus to adjourn?
Chair, I believe MP Chabot's got her hand up.
Madame Chabot?
Go ahead, Ms. Chabot. Very briefly, colleagues received 3 routine motions from me, and I just would like to present them on Thursday. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for having given us the notices of motion. They were duly received.
Consensus to adjourn. I see consensus in the room. We're adjourned. Thank you, colleagues. We'll see you Thursday.
See you.